When you come home with brand new baby chicks and you get them all situated in their nice little cozy brooder, there's something really exciting about that. But on the flip side, the last thing you want to do is come home to find out that you don't have everything you need. So today I'm here to make sure that you have everything you need when you bring home your baby chicks. We're going to be talking about quite a few different things today. There will be links in the description for everything we talk about here today. One of the very first things you're going to need is a brooder. And what a brooder is something to put your chicks in to where they can't escape and you can kind of just keep them contained and keep them warm. Now, brooders come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and most of them are honestly kind of DIY. You can get kind of pre-made package deals that come with brooders, but those aren't that great. What a lot of people use, and what we used quite a bit, is just these little totes here. These totes are just big enough to hold your chicks. They're tall enough so they can't jump out too easily, and they're easy to heat, and they're just really a good shape and size for using as a brooder. This is what we used for about the first 2 years that we had chicks, and then what we did is we upgraded to what I call an IBC tote. I think that's what they're called. Either way, it's more of like an industrial tote. They're just really big plastic totes, and we cut a door in it and turn that into a brooder. I have an entire video on that specifically, so I'll make sure I put a link to that down in the description. But more or less, all you need is a container to hold your birds. You want to make sure it's something that's waterproof, like watertight, because as the birds are in there, they're gonna make a mess. It's gonna get really wet and really nasty. You want to make sure you have something that's gonna kind of contain all that and something that's gonna be easy to clean. And I know that some people are gonna be asking, well, how many chicks can you keep in here? And well, that really depends. It depends on the size of tote that you get, and it also depends on, as they grow, do you have the yard room or the yard space or the time to be letting those chicks out and kind of roam the yard a little bit and get them some outdoor time? If you get the chicks out of their brooder relatively often, then the size of the tote isn't as big of a deal. So just kind of keep in mind that part of this is taking the chicks out as they get older and kind of introducing them outdoors. The next thing we're going to talk about is some kind of wire mesh for the top of your brooder. You'll be pretty surprised that within the first couple of days of taking your chicks home, they're going to be like little jumping beans trying to jump out of your brooder. And you want to have something on the top of that tote or on the top of that brooder to keep them from jumping out. So what we use is a wire mesh just like this, and we end up zip tying it to the top of the tote. Either that, or a lot of people use chicken wire, something like that. The only thing you want to stay away from is you don't want to use the lid to the tote, because the lid to the tote doesn't give it enough airflow. It kind of keeps it too hot on the inside of that brooder, and you can cook your chicks that way. Next up, we have a brooder heater, and this is going to keep your chicks warm. If you think about it, if you look at any kind of videos of a hen with baby chicks, those chicks are going to be running in and out from underneath their mom, and that's because they're trying to regulate their body temperature, and this does that perfectly for them. I know a lot of people use heat lamps, and we did in the past. Honestly, we used heat lamps for years, but every single year you see more and more stories about houses burning down, about barns burning down, chicken coops burning down, and it's not just heat lamps in the coop, it's also heat lamps in the brooder. I kept reptiles for a long time. I had snakes and lizards and all sorts of stuff that took heat lamps. So when I first got into chickens, I just kind of used heat lamps because that's what I was used to. Well, the biggest difference there is reptiles aren't going to have the feathers and the dust and all the really flammable things that are going to be kicked around inside. All these things are extremely flammable, and in an instant, your brooder can burst out into flames, it can burn your house down, it can burn your barn down, and they are really dangerous. To me, that's not worth it. It's worth it to me to spend a few extra dollars on something like this that is going to be safer. It's going to be better for the chickens because you can regulate the temperature on this. The problem with the heat lamp is the temperature is just so constant and so concentrated. If you have the lamp too close to the chickens, they can get too hot and it can kill them. If you have the heat lamp too far away from the chickens, it can do the opposite. They can get too cold and it can kill them. So these little brooder heaters are pretty amazing. You can start them out really low. You can adjust the angle on them. You can bring them up as the chickens get older. And this kind of allows the chickens to regulate their own body temperature. So you don't have to be the one worrying about how high your lamp is. This does it for you. And these radiant heat panels, they're gonna give the chickens a sense of security. Because like I said, if you look at a mother hen, those chicks are running in and out from underneath her, and that's their safe place. This gives them that same kind of feeling. They can go underneath it. It gives them a little place to hide. The next thing we're going to talk about today is feeders and waterers. You'll hear a lot of people say that you want to use red because red is going to teach them that red means food and water. And then later on down the road, if you want to use the little nipple drinkers or the cup drinkers that you hook onto things, if you want to use those, they're already going to understand that red is the color that gives them food and water. We have used both. Last year, I don't think we had any red, and our chicks did just fine understanding where the food and water was coming from. This year we're gonna be using a little bit of both, and I'm not worried whatsoever about the color. So realistically, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, I don't feel like the color of these matters, so just get whatever's available to you. The size of these matters a little bit. There's a few kind of pros and cons with the size of these. I have a huge brooder, so I can kind of handle having some bigger ones in there. The issue you're gonna run into is if you use a big water and you have a small brooder, they kind of tend to play in that water and they kind of kick the water out, and it can get really wet and really messy in your brooder really quickly. So bigger is not always better. Now, another thing I'm gonna say about the waters is try to put them above the bedding. So maybe get a little piece of wood or something, put them above the bedding, but not so high that the chicks can't get their beaks in there. What can happen is if you put it on the bedding, the chicks are gonna fill this thing up with bedding, and you're gonna be in there trying to scoop out all the little wood shavings out of there. Even if you elevate it, you still have that issue a little bit, but it's not nearly as bad as if you put it on the bedding itself. Now, the pro to having a big one of these is as long as your chicks aren't knocking it over, you can fill it up once, and then it takes a few days for this water to run out. So if you have chicks that are clean, or if you have a brooder that is big enough, then a big water is pretty nice. Now, for the feeders, you can get away with a little bit more. They're not quite as messy, but they will kind of peck some of that food out, and it'll kind of get lost in the bedding. But with this, I like to have a big one because I like to fill it all the way up, so I don't have to keep filling it every single day or twice a day. I like to have a big one of these. But just know that you will need a feeder and you will need a water. Your chicks need constant access to both food and water. All right, now let's talk about chick food. The chick food that most people are gonna be using is going to be a medicated chick grower crumbles. And you wanna use the crumbles over the pellets because the crumbles are gonna be small enough for those chicks to eat. You don't wanna give them the pellets quite yet. This is also a chick grower, so it's gonna have a higher protein percentage than what you're gonna be getting with your normal chicken food, and that protein percentage is gonna bulk them up a little bit. The medicated food is gonna be helping with coccidiosis. I honestly don't know how to say that, but I'll put the word right here, coccidiosis. If the chicks are eating like droppings or the soil, they can transmit that, and it's often deadly for baby chicks. So the medication in this food is gonna help with that. It is also gonna have a lower calcium percentage because when they're this young, they don't need that higher calcium. And if you give them too much calcium when they're young, it can actually be harmful for them. Their body can't handle all that calcium and it kind of builds up. So you don't want to give them the high calcium food until they're older and they're ready to start laying eggs. The chick starter grower is really the good way to go when you're looking at baby chicks. This is what you want to start with. The next thing you need is bedding for your birds. The bedding we use are the pine shavings, and we like these flakes because they're a little bit bigger, so you don't have to worry about the birds accidentally ingesting them, and it helps a lot with water absorption. It kind of keeps it a little bit cleaner. This stuff isn't dusty at all, and dust can be a real issue in your chick brooder. It kind of builds up and you go to open it and you just kind of inhale all that nasty dust, and it gets pretty bad. This stuff is also really good where if once it does get dirty inside of your chick brooder, you can put it into the compost pile, and this stuff composts really well. And what a lot of people do when they very first get the chicks, so maybe the first 2 or 3 days, instead of using bedding, they're actually gonna be using paper towels. They put the paper towels down and it gives them a nice clean bedding for their first few days to kind of get them acclimated to the brooder. So a lot of people do use the paper towels, and that's definitely not a bad way to go. But once those paper towels are done, you wanna move them to a nice bedding, just like this one here. The next things we're gonna talk about are things that aren't necessarily needed, but they are good to have. And the first things are gonna be electrolytes. I don't have any here to show you, but I'll put some pictures up. And the electrolytes are things that you just mix in with their water. Oftentimes the chicks went through a pretty long journey to get to you. So giving them these electrolytes kind of gets them back to where they need to be, gives them the extra minerals and nutrients, and kind of gets them ready to start growing and kind of get back to normal from that big journey. The next thing we're gonna talk about is grit. And grit is something that you oftentimes just hear about with the adult birds, but it's something that the younger birds need too, especially after they start eating anything other than their chick starter grower. Once you start feeding them treats, or once you start letting them kind of graze around outside, they're gonna need something to help break that food down, because what happens is they don't have teeth. They just have these little beaks and they're gonna eat the food, but they have no way to kind of break that down. So what happens is if you put the grit inside their food and just kind of sprinkle it in there, it sits in their gizzard, it crushes that food after they eat it, and that way they can get it digested. So this isn't something that's necessarily needed, but this is definitely something that's good to have. If you are still on the fence about getting chickens and you're not quite sure if you're ready to pull that chicken trigger, go watch this video right here. We talk about 8 reasons that everybody should get chickens right now. I will be the angel or the devil on your shoulder that is just whispering in your ear telling you that maybe chickens are right for you. So go watch that video and I'll see you there.